In this video, we're going to look at how to create a Jenkins instance using Ansible. And please stick with me to the end, and we'll also have a look at how to export already created jobs from Jenkins into an XML file that we can use in our automation when we build our Jenkins instance to actually have our jobs there ready for us. So the first thing we need to do is set up a playbook, create a Jenkins role, and put all the things in it that you need to set up Jenkins. So let's go ahead. First of all, I'm going to put in an inventory file now with my server that I need and the server that is sitting there not doing anything. Let's call it Jenkins. And this is the IP address of that server. Let's just check that we can actually get into that server. Yeah, and it's just recently been built. There's nothing on it. So let's copy our ID to it. Brilliant. So now we should just be able to log straight in. Perfect. Okay, so we've got our inventory file. We've got our IP address. So the next thing we need to do is start building out an initial playbook. So I'm going to call it play.yaml. And let's build it out. So we've got our 3 dashes. We've got our name. And let's call it Jenkins build. In fact, I'm going to bring that like that. And then hosts. We know it's Jenkins as we put that in the inventory file here and called it Jenkins. So any server that is under the Jenkins group. We don't need any var files or anything like that. We just need a role. And the role that we're going to call it is just going to be called Jenkins build. And that's it. That skeleton playbook should be everything that we need. So let's now go and build a skeleton role for Jenkins. So Ansible Galaxy init. We're going to put it in a roles directory and we're going to call it Jenkins_build. And there we go. So we now have a roles directory with Jenkins_build. And in tasks and in main is where we're going to be writing all of our code. So at the moment, if we were to run this, let's see what happens. So we do Ansible playbook -i inventory and then play. Now there's nothing actually in main to do, but I just wanted to check that all the syntax and everything like that was all good, and it is. So there's no errors. I mean, there's a warning here about the Python interpreter, but we can simply ignore that and move along. So let's go ahead and have a look at the instructions for installing Jenkins. So if you go to their documentation, and I'll put a link to this in the description, there are actually different links in here throughout the page for different major Linux distributions. The server that we're going to be building on is derived from Red Hat. I'm actually using an Alma Linux installation, but Alma Linux, Rocky Linux, Fedora, Red Hat, CentOS, they're all the same, really, in terms of the process for installing here. So having a look through here are the instructions of what we need to do. So I can instantly see here it's saying we need to get the Jenkins repository from here. Now it's using a wget to get that and putting it into this location. It's then doing an RPM import to grab the RPM key for it. And then it's going through installing Java and then installing Jenkins, and then you're done. So it's quite a simple installation process, but still something I think that we can have a look at and get working perfectly. So one of the interesting things with this is that it's actually, their instructions tell you to pull down their repo file and place it into the Jenkins repo. Now, that's all very well and good, and that's a perfectly fine way to do things. and we can use the URL get URL module to go and do that should we want to. There is also a Yum repo module that we could use, where we could just go and find what's in that repo file. So if we were to go here and have a look inside that repository, we would actually see that this is the URL. So we could do it one of two ways. I'm going to do it via the repository way. I just think it's a bit cleaner than curling a file that you don't always know what's in it. But we know that this here is the base URL for Jenkins. So let us now go over and have a look at some of the Ansible documentation. So this is the Ansible Yum repo module. So the Yum repo module will go, as it says, and create a repository for us. Let's go and have a look at the examples. And we can actually take this first one and use it pretty much, apart from changing some bits, we can use it exactly as it is. So let's go to our roles, Jenkins build tasks, main.yaml, and in here we can do add the Jenkins repository. We want to call it Jenkins. The description is the Jenkins repository, or we'll just call it repo, and then we need to go and grab that URL that we saw earlier, which is that. So if I now went and ran this playbook, what should happen is it will go and add that repository for us. You can see there, add Jenkins repository changed. So it's already gone and added that repository for us. Now, having a look again at the instructions, it also says that we need to add a key. Okay, so if you actually went and tried to install Jenkins now, it would tell you there was an error with the GPG key. You could go and update your repository to say to ignore those errors. However, it's always better to add the keys where you can. So again, let's move that out of the way. Let's have a look at the next module, which is the RPM key module. So the RPM key module will do exactly that. It will put a key into the RPM database to allow you to do things. So let's take this first one. Another great example. We'll put it in underneath here. Import Jenkins key from, we'll just do that. Okay. Now we've got RPM key, we want it to be present, and then we need actually the name of the key. So in the instructions, it told us exactly where that key was. And here it is. So if we went and ran that now, what should happen is it should import our key. Import the key, and there we go, it's changed. We'll see it didn't need to do anything with the repository because it was already done. The instructions then say that we need to install Java 11, Jenkins, and then do a systemctl daemon reload. So the next thing we're going to need is the packages module. Install Jenkins and Java. So let's use the package module. So we're going to do name. Now we can do this like this in a list. So let's grab, we know we need Jenkins. And also we need, I'm just pulling up the instructions, the OpenJDK. I just want to see which one they want us to use. So they want us to use Java 11 OpenJDK. And actually in their instructions, and I have seen this, they want you to install OpenJDK before Jenkins. So we should do it first. Now the reason for this actually is that when Jenkins, as part of the installation process, Jenkins tries to start. Now if OpenJDK is not there, Jenkins will fail to start. So the last thing it wants us to do is a systemctl daemon reload. So if we have a look at the systemd module in Ansible, here it is, and again look at some examples. Have a look down here, there'll be a systemctl daemon reload. I'm just having a look, here it is. And we can do that last. Now let's go ahead and run this playbook. And there we have it. So it's installed Jenkins, Java. There's no error. So it's managed to start it. It's restarted, or rather reloaded systemd to pull in all the recent configuration. As I said earlier, when it goes through this process, it does actually try and start the service, or does something with the service that needs Java there. So what we now need to do is use the service module. Again, back to the examples, and we're going to use this one. The reason I want to use this one is it's got an enabled equals yes, which will ensure that it is then set on boot. So I'm a big believer in reusing code. Start and enable service for Jenkins. So that's just Jenkins. So that's just got enabled yes. Now we can add in here state started and run it again. Now what we should notice is that everything else just is green. It's already done. It shouldn't need to do anything, and it just gets straight down very quickly to start and enable the Jenkins service. To make that read nicer, I will just swap this around while it's doing it. And that might take a moment just to start the service. And there we go, it started it. So what we should notice now, if I go back now to that URL, I should be given a Jenkins page. Now, as with a lot of code, and what I'm now going to show you is a way to actually bypass all of this. So this is saying that, we need to go and grab the initial admin password, and then we can go through and get into Jenkins and set everything up manually. There are a few other steps that we can actually create some configuration files that when we run Jenkins, it gets past this menu and does some other things. So let's go and have a look at that. I'm just going to remove this out of the screen and we will continue down. So I'll put a link to the description of the blog post that I found to do this. But essentially it's just a couple of files that does this. So those files are, let me have a look here. So we've got the upgrade wizard state. So I've already done this before. I'm going to copy and paste it in here. So we've got set the default. So in the files menu, we're going to have a Jenkins default, and we need to put that in varlib Jenkins, which is its directory that it runs out of, and it needs to be Jenkins install upgrade wizard state. And there's the contents of this that I will go and copy and paste in there in a minute, and hopefully that should all work. The other thing that we need to do is some basic security. So this will sort out the upgrade wizard, but the other thing that we need to do is inside initgroovy.d in varlib Jenkins, we need to do some things. So let's go and create the folder, which I've done here. Make sure the state of it is a directory. And then again, we'll put a file in there. So this is just setting a username and password. We're going to use the template module, and it's going in, getting it from files, security.groovy, and we're putting it in varlib Jenkins, initgroovy.d, which is the directory we just created, basic security.groovy. Now, if we do that, what will happen is it will all just work. It will go ahead, we'll bypass that initial wizard, and we'll be able to set our admin password in code. Now, what's obviously very important with that is we need to make sure that we hide usernames and passwords, encrypt them with Ansible Vault or something like that. So let's now go and actually create these files. So in files, we've got two things to create. So the first thing that we've got is the Jenkins default. So in Jenkins default, we only need to add one thing. So let's create that file now. New directory, Jenkins default. And in here, we need to write 2.0. That's it, nothing else. The other file has a lot more information inside it, and that is security.groovy. So security.groovy. And again, I'm going to copy and paste this out. And I've here created a variable called admin pass. I could just put the password in there, or I could actually go through and put this in a vars file, which is what I'm going to do. So we've got set allow anonymous read to false. By default, if you don't do that, anybody can look without logging in at your Jenkins code. They might not be able to make any changes to it, but they'll be able to see your runs, they'll be able to see your outputs and things like that, something you definitely don't want. And then the other thing that we need is to set the authorization strategy, just so that we actually have it set to be able to use this username and password, and then we save that instance. So with this in place, that should now, let's just go and run that. Go and make those changes to Jenkins, and then I'm going to go, and the last thing it does is a started in the playbook here. So what I'm actually going to do is, while that's running, of course I haven't set my admin password yet, have I? But that's fine, because also I've got in here the service. So what I'm actually going to do is set this to restarted. So at the end of doing all of this, it's going to restart the service. And then the last thing that I still need to do is go and set this admin password. To set the password, we can put it in a couple of places. We could put it in the inventory file. We could do a group variables. But as this is a secret password, what I'm going to do is create a custom variables file, import it in the playbook, and then encrypt that file with Ansible Vault. So first and foremost, let's go and create that file. So I'm going to call it secret.yaml. I'm going to call it, I think it was called admin pass. So admin pass. And I'm just going to call it password123. And then in the playbook, we need to do vars, files, and then do secret.yml. Now, just very quickly, I just want to make sure that this playbook runs and that there's no errors. I could do a lint or something like that. Yeah, it's going through and building, so that's fine. Now, the last thing I want to do is actually encrypt this file. Now, there's two ways you could do it. I could encrypt this string and just put the encrypted string in here. So now we've got the password. Let's go and encrypt it. So we can do Ansible Vault encrypt secret.yaml. I'm going to go and put a password in. And you can see now that is an encrypted string. Now, if we were to run our playbook now, that's not going to work because we have encrypted data. It's not going to know. It's going to go through, but it can't decrypt that because there are no vault secrets found. So there's two ways we can give it a vault secret. We could put the secret, the password that I just did, I could put that into a file somewhere else on the file system and write an Ansible configuration file to say where it is. Then that password is used for encrypting and decrypting, when you don't have to then provide it on the command line. For the purpose of this, I'm just going to do ask vault pass. So every time it runs, it's going to ask me for the Ansible Vault password. If I go and put that in now, it will go through and run everything. So we'll see here this security.groovy file. We've got an admin and that variable of admin pass. Now we can go and see here it's set the username and password. So if we go and have a look on the server itself, let's have a quick look here and have a look in this file here. So it's 10.104.1.168. And in this file here, you see it's creating an account with a password of 123. So let's now go and have a look at Jenkins. So there was, let's log out of this, grab this IP. No more have we got the login page. We can now just put admin password 123 and we will get into Jenkins. Now there's one very interesting point about this. If you go down this method, during the initial wizard for Jenkins, it imports a lot of modules. So for example, if you do a new item, you've only got a freestyle project, you haven't got anything else because you didn't import those modules to do it. So the next thing that we could do is actually go and use the Jenkins CLI. Now the Jenkins CLI is brilliant. It allows you to import jobs, it allows you to import plugins, export jobs, and things like that. So let's go and do that just to get a more richer experience in Jenkins and not have to set up a lot of other things manually. So the Jenkins plugin is actually already installed. but it's quite difficult to get to on the file system. It's a lot easier just to go and grab the URL. Now I'm going to do this in the same Jenkins build module. Some people may choose to do this in a separate module so that you've got an installation of Jenkins and then you can import things after the fact. For me, Jenkins currently isn't very useful, so I'm going to keep it in the same module. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and get the Jenkins plugin, and we're going to use the get URL. Now, it is in the following location. There. So if we do URL and then do HTTP localhost port 8080, which is the default, and go to this location, you will be able to then download the file. But we need to then say where we want it to go. So I'm going to put it in the root directory and call it Jenkins CLI.jar. And then what we need to do is actually go and use it to install some things. Now I've got a copy and paste here that I'm going to use and then talk through it. And here it is. So this install plugins, you have to run the shell module. So you run this Java file and then you give it some parameters. So you give it a -s and you know, where your Jenkins is installed. We need to go and set this up, this authentication, with the Jenkins username and password. Then we give it install plugin, sorry, and then we go through green balls. I like it, makes your past builds go to green instead of blue. The GitHub's plugin, the folders plugin, dashboard view, and a hell of a lot of other things in there. You know, the SSH agent, workflow aggregator is a big one, SSH slaves, etc. So I like to go and do this. So the one thing that we need to set up is this auth file. So to do that, just before that, I'm going to go and run this. So this in root Jenkins auth is going to be my username and password that I have already set, that is part of my secret file, right? So in files, we need to create Jenkins plugin auth, and in there we need to give it a username and a password. Looking like this. So we know the admin uses admin, and that admin pass, if we just leave it like that, it will actually go and pull that from here. So that should work straight away. So back here, so that's going to go and put that into root Jenkins auth, and then we're going to use that to go and install some plugins. So let's go and see. Actually, before we do that as well, we will need to restart Jenkins after installing those plugins. So we can see now it's running that and installing those plugins. So you can see there it's installed those plugins. It's now restarting Jenkins, and there we are. We're back to where we are. So let's now go back to Jenkins. Let's log in. Now if we go to new item now, you can see we've got a lot more things, and that's because we've installed all those plugins. Now the final thing that we could do is actually be able to import and export jobs. So I'm just going to go and create a very, very simple job, and I'm going to call it test 1. It's going to be a freestyle project. This is a freestyle test project. I don't like to keep old builds, and the reason for that is if you update Git code, it doesn't always do a Git pull. I will make it go to Git, and I'll just put in a Git repository. It won't work. It's nothing that will actually run, but let me go and do that now. So we'll get the error, that's fine. I'm just putting in a repository just to show you that it will still be there. Instead of master, a lot of people are using main these days, either master or main, depending on which branch you're using. And then you may have some build triggers, etc. You know, there's lots of different things. You might execute a shell script after that. Etc. So let's go and apply that. I'm not going to run it because it's not going to, well, I mean, I can run it, it's not going to work. We'll see that build pretty quickly fail. There, it's already failed. So what we can do now is export this job. Now, exporting the job is, again, relatively simple to do using that Jenkins plugin. So let's go across to the console and have a look at that. So let's log into that server. And obviously we're going to need to export it first, and then we can use that export to go and import things. So the first thing we need to do is run all of this. So again, we're using the Jenkins CLI. The source is here, and the authentication file is this file that we set earlier. So the parameter we need after that is get job, and then the name of the job. Now, I believe we called it test1. So we just put in there test1, and then let's output it to an XML file, which is the format in which the jobs are stored in. So, of course, it didn't have a space. Let's remove that. And there we go. So if we actually have a look in test.xml, we'll see there lots of information about it. So what I'm actually going to do now is store this file. Up to here. In files, I'm going to call it test1.xml. I'm going to put the contents of that in there. Not that. So that is the contents of the file. It's called test1.xml. And then just before this reboot here, I'm actually going to go and use the template module and copy that in. Copy in test.1 job. So using the template module, we've got a source and we've got a destination. So the source will be files, test1.xml. The destination can just be root test1.xml, it doesn't matter. Because the important bit actually is running the import. So the import will be as follows. So let's do name install import test1 job. We're going to have to run the shell command again, and it's going to be very similar to what we've seen already, in that we've got this bit. The source again is here, that's the Jenkins auth file, but we're actually now going to use create job. Now we have to say what we want the job to be called. Let's call it test2. We've already just had test1. The actual name of the job is not in the export, so you can call it whatever you want. And then you need to do where the file is. So we've actually put it in test1.xml. Right, there's test1.xml. And then we can end that off with a quote. And that should be it. So if we were to run that again, it should now go through and set everything up, import that job. Now we could shuffle things around a little bit here, perhaps do the restart before doing these infrastructure jobs, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest. The only thing I've noticed is that when you're doing a restart, you might need to do a wait or a pause or some kind of check to make sure the service is up, because it has got me in the past where you do a restart here and then you do the import, and actually the import fails because Jenkins hasn't actually fully started yet. So you can see there the import test is done. Now we called this test2. So let's go ahead and go and have a look here. So let's restart this. It's restarted, so we're going to need to log in again. And here is test 2. And test 2 should have this is a freestyle test project. We've discarded old builds, a random GitHub repository. We used main, and that's it. And we did the hello world.